titled "Sad That Reader Does Not Appreciate the Gospel." I am sorry, though not surprised, that an anonymous atheist does not like to hear the good news of the gospel. Further to that, he does not have the time or resources to tell us of the great benefits of humanism and secularism. The person he is complaining about has a part-time job, morning and evening, cleaning offices, using the rest of his time to preach the gospel. Yeah, that's very unusual, that someone who has a job and then uses their free time to do something they like doing. Yeah, that's amazing. I would personally like to know about the benefits secularism and humanism have to bestow upon humanity. Well, David, we have something called the internet these days, which, if you use, you can find these things out in about 5 minutes. So if we just look, that's what I've done, using something called Google. If we look at the British Humanist Association website, it says, "We want a world where everyone lives cooperatively, on the basis of shared human values, respect for human rights, and concern for future generations. We want non-religious people to be confident in living ethical and fulfilling lives on the basis of reason and humanity." And it also says, "We campaign for a secular state, challenge religious privilege, and promote equal treatment in law and policy of everyone, regardless of religion or belief." So obviously very, very evil and demonic there. The letter continues, "Does not believing in God make the drunkard sober, the immoral person moral, the dishonest honest, or the aggressive peaceable? No, it doesn't. I know of nobody who has testified to this." Good, I'm glad you don't know anyone who's testified to that, because if you did, you'd know some pretty stupid people. "I do know of a great many, myself included, who can testify to the transforming power of God through the gospel." Yeah, testifying to something is one thing, actually being able to prove it is a completely different matter, and yeah. To see the results of what secular humanism has accomplished, so apparently David does actually know something about secular humanism, even though he said he didn't before, we have only to look at the recent history of our own nation. As Christian influence has declined, criminality has increased. There are those yet living who can remember when it was safe to leave their houses unlocked. Friday and Saturday nights in town centres were not virtual war zones like they are now. Abortion clinics and contraceptive pills were unheard of. Promiscuity and perversion were whispered about in corners. There were not tens of thousands of single-parent families supported by the state at great expense. Now, what I love about this is that only a couple of paragraphs before, or just a couple of sentences before, you were saying abortion clinics and contraceptive pills were unheard of, and like that was a good thing. And then you complained next again about single-parent families supported by the state at great expense. Well, no, maybe a bit more, education on these matters might actually be a good thing then, David. Our eyes and ears were not assaulted by pornographic images. Note the use of the word assaulted there. Coarse language and violent scenes as they are now. Our children did not have routine access to pornography via the internet and mobile phones. Neither were they taught to be immoral in the classroom as they are now under the guise of sex education. Okay, stop. Guise of sex education. There is no way you are convincing me in a million years that sex education is some kind of conspiracy to teach people to be immoral. And again, this goes right back to your original point about abortion clinics, which you then contradict with your point about single-parent families. More sex education is generally a good thing. It kind of stops these things. It kind of stops, any things like underage pregnancy, or again, if people know how to use contraceptives as well, you don't get people with, too many children or whatever. Oh, God. To see atheism in its true colours, dictated by its genes, let us consider the atheistic state, that's actually what he said, of the last and this century. They were and are brutal dictatorships. Hapless millions perished and are perishing at the whim of their atheistic rulers, applying the evolutionary principle of the survival of the fittest. Stop. Evolution is not a moral doctrine. Evolution is a well-supported scientific theory which explains how life on our planet has changed over time. And do you know how I know that? Because I went to a school where we were allowed to learn about things like science. Stuff that would once upon a time have been considered witchcraft. Again, using this as trying to imply this as something bad about evolution, it's a bit like saying if we can push people off cliffs and they plummet to their death, that's following the evil doctrine of Newtonian physics. It just doesn't make any sense. If anonymous atheist does not wish to hear gospel preaching, the best place for him to go is North Korea, where the Christians are in concentration camps being slowly brutalized to death. Yeah, I really love how you sort of given us two options here. Either be in Chester Town Centre, where you can listen to someone shouting very, very loudly and repeatedly about God, or you can go to North Korea, where Christians are being slowly brutalised to death. I love the way you think because someone doesn't like having the gospel yelled at them continually, that they obviously want to go somewhere where they can see Christians being murdered. Brilliant logic there. Okay, the same thing will happen in this nation, where Christians are increasingly being penalised for daring to oppose the politically correct agenda of the liberal elite. Only the preaching of the gospel and a return to biblical standards can prevent this. Oh God, David. The liberal elite. You think the liberal elite want to put Christians into concentration camps? They wouldn't really be liberal, and elite, again, just a very stupid use of that word. And to be honest, if anyone did want to do that, you'd need to do a lot more than preach the gospel at them, so that's stupid. Okay, letter number 2 is entitled An Arrogant Statement to Make. Enough of God's message writer would no doubt call himself or herself an atheist, and it is a rather arrogant statement to make. There is no God, which assumes that one has the complete knowledge of the cosmos. Yet that is really arrogant when people presume to have complete knowledge of the cosmos, isn't it? And it's definitely atheists who do that, not every single religion on the face of the planet. One is perfectly entitled to hold that view as long as you do not preach about it or publish it, for then it becomes dogma, ideology not too different from the man who preaches his ideology in town. He then says, in an age where we see freedom of speech is being curtailed, it is good to see one who has the courage to speak out. This paragraph comes right after a paragraph where he says, one is perfectly entitled to hold that view as long as you do not preach about it or publish it. So that's completely contradictory. You can't sort of be a staunch defender of freedom of speech on one hand and then say that people can't publish their views on another. That's just stupid. The next letter is entitled, What is Wrong with Good News? Before I go any further, I'd like to really request that people stop calling the Bible good news. If someone wanted to stand in the middle of the street and shout loudly about how they discovered a cure for cancer or a cure for AIDS or something like that, then yeah, that would be good news, and I could more than forgive someone for wanting to shout very loudly about it. Let's just rephrase that question to what it actually is. What is wrong with reading from a book at an obnoxiously loud volume in public? Hopefully the answer is self-explanatory. I reply to enough of God's message. How sad that our genetically programmed humanist leader cannot tolerate the good news messenger who sings the praises of the good Lord in Chester City Centre. If ever there was a time when the Christian message was needed, it is now. The need for honesty, love, goodwill and caring increases day by day. As society, this is actually what it says, as society crumbles under the burden of dishonest banks, supermarket and internet bargains that are fake, and politicians and councillors who are often self-serving instead of serving those they represent. Wow! I love the way honesty is the first Christian value. It's been a Yeah, I was just saying, I love the way honesty is espoused as the first Christian value here. Believing in things that are make-believe isn't honest. It's the opposite of honest. It's called dishonest. So that's ridiculous. And again, supermarkets, internet bargains, I don't know why on earth you're coming from there. And again, politicians and councillors are often self-serving. Well, that tends to be the case immaterial of worldview, I'm afraid. Crime levels are at an all-time high as drugs and drink take their toll, and many young people are deeply in debt, beguiled by modern advertising methods, which are operating a society of I want. And that's called capitalism, not atheism. I often wonder if people who criticise the Bible even read it. If they did, I find it hard to understand their antagonism. Wow, Neville, who is the writer of this letter. If you honestly can't understand why people would be antagonised by a book which condones the stoning to death of homosexuals, slavery, stoning to death of people who work on the Sabbath, the book also condones rape in some passages of the Old Testament, which goes back again to this bizarre sexual morality that was mentioned earlier, then you either just are very, very stupid, or you're a bit of a psychopath. I mean, that's obviously going to antagonise people. I mean, I often wonder myself, Neville, whether people who call themselves Christian have actually read the Bible. I think if a lot of them actually did, they'd be pretty horrified about what they're actually subscribing themselves to. And then the next paragraph, what is wrong with showing such virtues as love, forgiveness, being your brother's keeper? Well, again, I love the way Neville here smugly kind of points towards the sort of nicer sentiments of the Bible, while again ignoring things like the fact it condones slavery, stoning them to death of people, stoning homosexuals to death, stoning people who collect sticks on the Sabbath to death. So again, like, implying that that's the problem, you know, the problem people have with the Bible is that it preaches love, forgiveness, and being a brother's keeper. So again, nonsense. The Bible tells us we will have dominion over all, but it also commands that we replenish the earth. Not very good at that, are we? No, we're not. How many people in positions of authority live up to Christ's advice? Who shall be the master of all, shall be the servant of all. Again, written more than 2,000 years ago, the Ten Commandments are still the basis of good law, and Mark 5 is perhaps the wisest sermon ever given. The Ten Commandments, there's 3 of them which actually apply to modern law. One is that you shouldn't commit perjury, one that you shouldn't murder, and the other one that you shouldn't steal. They are the only 3. They are the only 3, and they are very common to most of the cultures of that time, and cultures before. So, no, I mean, to say that our laws are based on the Ten Commandments, they aren't. I mean, we can take the Lord's name in vain as much as we want, nobody cares, no one goes to prison for that. We can, you know, we can work on the Sabbath, fine. It's ridiculous to suggest that. People should also ask themselves, what happens when religion is sidelined? Fascism, communism and humanism have all sounded plausible in their day, but life without any kind of reverence for a creator invariably flounders on the rocks into deviance and selfishness, aided by greed and self-aggrandizement. Now, I mean, I love, look, again, the way with fascism, communism and humanism are mentioned together, like they're all just much of a muchness. Those are radically different views. And I don't think fascism has ever sounded plausible. So that's a bit bizarre. Fascism, again, if you're talking about people like Hitler, Hitler was, you know, was a Catholic. He was religious and he was a creationist as well. So I don't really need to go any more into that. Communism, the atheist aspect of communism is not the same as it is in humanism. Most communist regimes believed in an absolute devotion to the state, and they saw religion as a distraction from that. Again, this is the sort of thing you can learn in schools. A distraction from that, and they didn't like the idea of anything distracting from people's devotion to the state, so that's why they outlawed religion, which is not what brings us to humanism. No humanist or secularist is in this country is advocating the outlawing of religion. That's not what they're advocating. And humanism, I've already mentioned what that is. And again, this selfishness aided with greed and self-aggrandizement. I mean, I'm sorry, plenty of religious people are doing that right now. You have, televangelists in America or whatever, raking in huge amounts of money, and what's worse is faith healers and people like that raking in huge amounts of money, and they are exploiting the sick and dying, just pawing away to make money. Long may the good news be said and sang, I say. I am a full-time carer for my wife of 55 years who had a stroke 5 years ago. As a lifelong Christian, I know Christianity works, but only those who try to live by its standards can know that. Well, good for you, you're doing a good deed, la-di-da-di-da. As a lifelong Christian, well, I mean, everyone says that about their own worldview. We can't live by every worldview just to check which one works and which one doesn't. Even if we lived to be 200 years old, we wouldn't be able to do that. So you're just asking people to take your word on that. So yeah, that's just a bit of a brief read at what the people of Chester, the Christians of Chester, have to say about the loud, obnoxious preaching that goes on. Again, I just can't imagine what happened if everybody that was given the same freedom of speech, to the point where everyone took their favourite book out into the Chester city centre and just started reading very noisily from it. I think Christians might soon realise how irritating it is having to put up with this. So I can't say I'm sorry that this particular worldview is on the decline.